All right, so I'm starting off in the ML underscore start here level under UE VFX and levels. And I want to go over some of the basic navigation and some things you need to know about the interface. We're not going to go through every single menu and go through every single option. I just want to cover what you need to know to get started, and then we'll continue to learn some more features as we move along. So the first is our viewport, which is our window into the 3D world. The second is our content browser, which is our window down here, and this is where we'll have all of our files. And then on the right side, we have our outliner. So this is a list of all of the actors in our scene. An actor is just any object that we're placing in our 3D scene. It doesn't mean that it's a 3D mesh. A mesh is specifically the geometry that's associated with an actor, but an actor is just anything in the scene. Our 3D mesh is an actor. This is a character here, but even our lights are actors, and sometimes that's just represented by these icons. But any actor that we have in our scene will be listed here, and every actor has its own details that we can then modify. So let's start by just looking at our viewport. Let's make this a bit bigger. If you need to, you can just hit F11 if you click inside the viewport, and we'll go full screen. So every single actor in our scene can be selected, whether that is our skylight here or our sphere here. One thing every object will have is this little transform gizmo. So we can use this to translate things around our scene up and down. Also use our W, E, or R hotkeys. So W is for transform, E is for rotation, R is for scale. And so by default, whenever you open Unreal, we'll have a lot of snapping enabled. We have our transform snapping. So when this is enabled, our object will snap to every 10 units, and a unit in Unreal is in centimeters. So now I've set this to 50, so every 50 centimeters, we'll move this across our scene, or we can just disable that, and then we don't have any problems dragging around. A unique part of navigating in Unreal is if you hit Shift and then click on any object, you'll actually have your camera move along with your object. And sometimes when you have a gigantic world, like we will start to build in a future chapters, this will really help start to dial in things at a smaller scale. But we also have snapping in degrees for our rotation. I've disabled that. We have free rotation, and you get these decimal points that you can see there. And same with scale. By disabling that, we have full control over how big or small we want to make something in our scene. Worth noting is how this gizmo is oriented. Our gizmo has a red, green, and blue color, and this associates with our X, Y, and Z. So you can see they're labeled by colors. If I move this in forward X, so I'm going to drag this to the right, we would expect it to move towards that axis. So if it's aiming forward, it'll move forward. If we move it in a negative direction, it'll move backwards. And this is the same with our Z and our Y. Last thing is you're moving objects around in your scene. I do like to keep snapping on, especially when just setting up the layout of a scene with spheres and cubes and just blocking out the level in the first place. If you ever have an object like this that you just want to snap to the ground, you can also press the end key and it'll just take our gizmo and stamp it to the closest floor plane that we have in our scene. So this is our viewport. Typically, we're going to want to keep everything in perspective view, but we can also look in our orthographic views. These will default to our wireframe setup. We can change this to lit, but it doesn't work exactly like you'd think. So most of the time, you're going to want to orient yourself in perspective view. We can visualize this viewport in the way we render this scene in a lot of different ways. We'll get into this when we talk about materials in a little bit, so don't worry about that quite yet. But the last thing I want to talk about for now in terms of navigation is our viewport camera. So a couple things we can do here to navigate. Everything revolves around hitting right click in your scene, and as soon as you right click, now we can pan our camera around. And then we have video game controls because it's a video game engine. So WASD is what you might be used to, which is not typical in Maya or Blender or anything like that, but is very helpful, again, when we make these large scenes. And as we're moving around, one thing to keep note of is our camera speed. So we can adjust this by sliding this here. So if I increase this, we'll go way faster. We'll move really, really fast through our scene, which when we're setting up giant landscapes, this is pretty helpful. Otherwise, keep this fairly low. And another way we can adjust this is as you're moving around, you can just scroll your mouse wheel. I'm going to scroll it up, and you can actually see those numbers on the top right changing there. And now I'm set it really high, so I'm zooming around. But that's the quickest way and the way I'm typically navigating throughout the scene. If you ever want to frame up on an object or focus it, you just press the F key to focus your object. And then to orbit around or rotate around any object, if you hit Alt and click, we can just orbit around. And now that we're framed up or centered on our object, that basically just means that we're rotating around its center point. And then if you hold Alt and right click, we'll zoom in and out. And this is not zooming the focal length of the camera. We're actually translating further away or closer to our object. And if we zoom far away and then right click, our center point is still revolving around our object. So if you wanted to go super far away, we would still be orbiting around that object. And I'll just focus up to get closer here. The last thing I want to touch on in terms of navigation and moving our objects around the scene is this little globe icon here. And this is going to change our transform gizmo from world space to the local object space. So we were starting in world space, which is this globe, it's the world. That's how I know that when I move the location in the world, this is the world coordinates here. Based on this, I know if I'm moving forward or backwards. But if I change this to local space, this is especially useful if we ever transform our object in an awkward way. If I go back to our world coordinates, you can see it's still oriented square to the world. So if I'm rotating this very quickly, it can kind of go off kilter and we're not really rotating it the way the object is oriented. But if you press this button or hit Control and the tilde key, then you can orient this based on the object itself. And it's a lot easier to then line this up with the world. And if you ever want to reset the rotation or location of any object in the scene, there are these reset buttons next to almost every single detail. So I can just left click that. We've reset our orientation. Now we can move it forward yet again and hit the end key, and we'll move it back to our ground plane.